Do you actually know how to stand out from the crowd? Many think they do, but they actually do not. This is something that we all have struggled with at some point, and maybe you are going through this right now. Many people advise you to pick a specific niche for your social media accounts to stand out, but that's not actually good advice. Today we'll go through why picking a single niche isn't good for you, and 3 popular ways to stand out, and lastly we'll sum everything up. But before we start this video, can I ask you a favor? I know that around 94.1% of you who are watching this video right now have not subscribed, and you could be one of them. If you hit that subscribe button right now, my promise is that I will be bringing you as much value week in, week out as humanly possible. Do we have a deal? I hope you have subscribed. Now, let's start the video. 1. Why picking a single niche isn't good for you. Many people see that picking a niche is the only way to stand out on social media, and although it can help you grow in some way, it's also dangerous. Because what if your interests change one day? Maybe you're a photographer and you have posted photographs for who knows how long, but now you maybe are not as passionate about photography anymore. Maybe you'd want to make some other kind of content. But what do you do now? Like if you have done only photography content for a very long time and people have followed you only for your photography. So that is the danger here. I felt I was in that position, although I love to photograph and I do make photography content, but I didn't only want to post photos anymore like I had done for the last 6 years. Especially as posting like new photos every single day just isn't sustainable really. I talk more on sustainable systems in the video in one of the corners here, and make sure to watch that after this video. I wanted to also teach people something and diversify my content. When you make lots of different kind of content, you have the potential to stand out to lots of different people. If you only make content for a very specific group of people, that limits your growth. And it's dangerous if your interests change down the line. But of course you want to niche yourself to an extent, like you don't want to post like nature photography and then you randomly post a meme to your feed and then you post a random food picture of a croissant. Niche yourself to an extent, but don't too much. I personally make content for creatives, and that's quite a large group of people, isn't it? It can be photographers, painters, 3D artists, VFX people, writers, singers, filmmakers, any kind of other content creator, and the list just keeps going. Many would just pick one of those things that I mentioned and make content for those people. But what that means is that as I target much more people, I have like 10 times more potential followers out there. Broaden the circle for whom you want to make content for, and you will have the potential to grow much larger on social media and make more money. Now let's start with how to actually stand out in the best way. True, how to stand out. I've been reading about this a lot, especially in the last 2 years, and I feel I still could be doing better than I am doing right now. And that's why I decided to pick up this new book called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing by Al Ries and Jack Trout. I believe I got this book recommendation from either Tim Ferriss or Mark Cuban's video, one of them. And then I started reading this book on my flight to Amsterdam. And it's been so bloody good so far. I have not yet finished the book, but there's some golden nuggets I already got and I changed my entire perspective on standing out from the crowd. You have 3 things to keep in mind when you want to stand out. 1. Be first. 2. Be second. 3. Be alternative. Let's get into those right now. 1. Be first. This is the most powerful marketing tactic to stand out that there is, period. People and brands are known for being first at something. Which was the first imported beer to the United States? Heineken. But what about who was the second? Who was the first man to walk on the moon? Neil Armstrong. But who was the second one? Who was the first president of the United States? George Washington. Who was the second one? See where I'm going with this? People remember those who are first. They do not remember who was the second, the third, the fourth, and so on. And they don't care if some of those second or third or fourth or fifth are better than the first. Those win who get into people's minds as the first person to do something. Despite the disaster stories, many companies continue to violate the law of exclusivity. You can't change people's minds once they are made up. In fact, what you often do is reinforce your competitor's position by making its concept more important. The single most wasteful thing you can do in marketing is to try to change a mind. Right, Al? Trust Jack. Being first is the most important thing in standing out. You don't need to be better than your competition. The market doesn't care if you're better. You just must be the first. Regardless of reality, people perceive the first product into the mind as superior. Marketing is a battle of perceptions, not products. Right, Al, throw check. Now you are probably thinking about the same question that I was when I was reading this book. How on earth do I stand out and be the first one in today's age at something? It's not actually that challenging. This gets us back to not just posting about one thing to social media. You aren't the first photographer ever, you aren't the first artist ever, you aren't the first one to post stuff to social media ever, and so on. The key to stand out is combine things you are interested in, provide a touch of your own personality in the content. You want to have lots of different ingredients, and when you have lots of different ingredients, you can make lots of different unique combinations. And having yourself as one ingredient is an ingredient that nobody else can have, so you stand out. Being the true you is an easy way to be the first, because nobody is you. Nobody has 100% the same exact interests as you. And no, I don't mean that you exactly need to post like videos of yourself to social media. You can also do this with writing, for example. Your writing will eventually stand out because when you are combining your own different ingredients to the writing itself. But in the beginning, most people do not really care about you that much, but with the other ingredients out there, you can hook them into your own content, and then eventually they will start to get interested in you as well. Like my account, for example, most people when they see my photos for the first time, they don't really care about me as a person. They like the photos, they follow me, amazing. But then over time, they will see other content from me as well, like in stories and also reels, and maybe even photo posts in the future, who knows. And then they will start to care about me more as a person, and then nobody can compete with me. Let's touch on this more. Maybe you want to be the first at something, but it's not possible. You've heard of Uber. They were the first ones to get into people's minds with this new kind of product. But there are alternatives to Uber as well, like Bolt, for example. Maybe you have heard of them, maybe you haven't. But Uber were the first ones to get into the minds of their customers. So Bolt has no way of getting Uber's market share in the future. Being first is a superpower, but maybe you want to become a squirrel photographer, but you will have extremely hard time of doing that because Konstapunka is known as the squirrel whisperer. You aren't the first. Maybe you want to become the first NFT artist in your country, but somebody else has done that before you, so you aren't the first. Maybe you want to start a photography podcast, but you aren't the first photography podcast out there. What do you do then? Are you ruined? Will you never be successful? Don't worry. If you can't be the first in a category, set up a new category you can be first in. Rice Al, draw check. Maybe in addition to squirrel photos, you stand out with your behind the scenes footage of taking squirrel photos. Maybe you edit your squirrel photos in a way that nobody else has done before. Or maybe you are an 8-year-old grandma and you have just started photographing squirrels. Maybe you become an NFT artist. Maybe you stand out already with your unique art. If you do not, then maybe it is how you talk about your art, how you present your art, how do you show the behind the scenes of making your art. Maybe you start a photography podcast, but instead of only talking about photography, maybe you take other interests of yours and combine them with photography in some way. Maybe you could take, for example, health, if you are interested in health, and you combine that with photography. You could talk about how and why health is important for photographers, like how to maximize your creativity with food, for example. How have I stood out so far? 1, I'm 20 years old, and few 20-year-olds do what I'm doing. I'm not now talking about the photography side, like some people say I'm good at photography. I don't want to call myself good at photography for many reasons, but many people feel I'm great at it. But also I'm doing all kind of stuff like traveling around the world as a 20-year-old photographer, networking and so on. Many aren't doing that at my age. 2, I was bullied as a kid and I'm very open about that. 3, I'm very interested in how we humans and brains operate. And 4, I talk about why people should work less instead of more. And I have linked that to one of the corners right here that you can watch it after this video. 5, I live in Finland and Finland has its own different sceneries as a photographer, so I stand out with photographing this part of the world. And 6, I write a newsletter to creatives every week. None of this is of course the first thing that I'm at, but when you combine these things, it makes me the first one to actually have these things combined. I have created a new category for myself. 2. Be second and be alternative. Actually need to be the first always, but then it's important to be the second. Not third or fourth or fifth, second. Why? In the long run, marketing is a two-car race. Think about it. Cola industry, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, rent-a-cars, Avis and Enterprise rent a car, fast food, McDonald's and Taco Bell. The two largest in each category have the largest share of the entire market share as a whole. The third ones and so on have extremely small margins. There might be 3 or more competing in a category, but only 2 of them will actually thrive. Yes, the third, fourth, fifth, they could survive, but they will never thrive as a business. Like Burger King, it once was competing with McDonald's as the second, but then they did some marketing mistakes with trying to be first, what we're gonna get into, and now they are in who knows what place. It has major challenges compared to McDonald's and Taco Bell. But when you are the second, do not compete with the first one directly. Do not show you're better than them because you went the first and then customers have already made their minds up. Instead, you must show that you are an alternative. Embrace you are the second. Don't pretend you were the first if you weren't the first. People will know who was the first and who got into their minds first. For example, a friend of mine, Julia Aprin, he's a desert photographer and known as the Sahara Man. Now, if I went to Sahara and I started posting photos of that to X, or even Instagram to an extent, people would think of Julio instead of me. Because Julio is known as the guy who goes to the Saharas and does expeditions there. It's not me. If I would go to the north, then people would not think about Julio, you know, like some people then would think about me. Now, if you tell me that you are a desert photographer and nothing else, then you might be the second, third, fourth, fifth, you know, for me personally. But you would not be the first because Julio got into my mind as the desert photographer. In your position, I would never try to show like you were the first ones to do expeditions in Sahara, you know, because Julio was the first one to get into people's minds. And I would not try to show like, hey, I know Sahara better than Julio himself, or that I can take better Sahara photos than Julio. But the thing is that, yes, those are subjective, but it doesn't matter to customers because Julio was the first one to get into people's minds. So do not compete with him. Instead, what you should do is show that you're the first and acknowledge that. Julio, for example, has quite expensive photographs. Maybe you show that, okay, Julio has expensive photographs, maybe I am the photographer for the masses. I sell my photos for a cheaper price. That's one way you could show yourself as an alternative to Julio. You aren't trying to show like you're better, you're just showing that you are alternative to Julio. History shows that the first one will lose some market share to the second one, but this only happens if the second one isn't directly trying to be better than they are. Summarizing this all together. Be you, be first. If you aren't the first, embrace the second, and if you're the third, create a new category. Being you is an easy way to stand out, and that's how you become the first at something at least. But you must put effort to showing that you were the first at something, because if you get a great idea, it doesn't matter that you got the great idea, you must actually do something with the idea and show the people like, hey, I have this idea and I was the first one to come up with this stuff. Consistency and showing up often is a great way to stand out as well. And I talk more of that in this video, so make sure to watch that next.